All right, let's talk about unseen potential in the kids that we serve. What is the unseen potential? What does that even mean? Let's look at the word potential. Having or showing the capacity to become, or what you could develop into in the future, right? I love those two words at the beginning. Either you already have it or you're showing it. So showing it means it's evident, it's visible. You can see that potential in somebody, but some people have it and it's not showing yet. It's still about potential. They have it, but it's not showing yet. And then let's balance that with faith. In Hebrews 11:1, it talks about, now faith is the confidence in what we hope for and the assurance of what we do not see. So both of these are talking about either seeing or having, but not yet seen. Every one of us has some potential. Every child that we work with has got potential, but we don't always see it. So how can we approach them? How can we have a potential mindset so that we can move forward, help them keep moving forward the best we can? Let's talk about David for a minute. The shepherd David. He was a little guy. He was a teenager. Scholars think he was somewhere between the age of 10 and 15 before he was anointed as king. So he's out there, probably a scrawny teenager working with the sheep, right? And Samuel is told by God to go visit the family of Jesse in 1 Samuel 16:5-13. So Samuel goes to Jesse's family. He says, the Lord's told me to anoint one of your sons as the next king. Well, Jesse is very excited about that, brings the oldest, and he says the oldest was tall and handsome and rugged. And Samuel looks at him and says, nope, that's not him. So they go through all the boys and they find out, nope, that's not him. And then it says in verse 7, it says, but the Lord looked at Samuel, or told Samuel, don't look at his appearance, meaning the first one. Don't look at his appearance or how tall he is, because I have rejected him. And this is a famous verse that many people quote often. God does not see as humans see. Humans look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. So that's a common human frailty we have. We look at the outside appearance. We judge a book by its cover. That's where that phrase came from. Most likely, don't judge a book by its cover, because it's so human to do so. So here's where it's coming from. God does not see as humans see. Humans look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. So that was the first one. They went through all the boys, and the Lord said, none of these boys are going to be the king. So then Samuel says, are these all your sons? And Jesse says, well, they're still the youngest out in the field. So Jesse didn't think to bring in David at that stage, even though he heard one of his sons is going to be anointed as king, left David out there in the field. They knew David. He was the little brother, right? They knew something about him. They'd spent time with him, and yet they didn't at that point see the potential that David would have to be king. If they had seen it, they would have brought him in. Samuel didn't show up and say, hey, one of your boys is going to be anointed as king, and everybody say, well, we all know who it is. It's going to be David, right? They didn't see that potential in him yet, so they left him out in the field. So they bring David in, and Samuel says, Lord, is this the one? The Lord says, this is the one. They anoint him with oil. The rest of the brothers are standing back there saying, what's going on? He's the little brother. He's the youngest. He's the scrawny teenager. Why him? They did not see in David what the Lord saw in David. He had the potential. It wasn't evident yet to their physical eyes, but it was evident to God. It was in David all along. God saw it, but the human eyes didn't see it. Was Jesse, the dad, was he wrong to not have seen that in David? No, he wasn't wrong. He saw a skinny, scrawny teenager. That's what he saw. Were the brothers wrong for not seeing that? No, they weren't wrong. They saw a skinny, scrawny teenager. Now let's parallel that story of David the shepherd with another story about human potential. I was in Texas going to a training camp, driving through these dusty trails, and we stopped at a little dinky town. And I was in this hamburger shop. It wasn't a national chain. It was just a little dinky hamburger shop. And on the wall was a picture of Leon. And I saw that picture and I said to myself, I know Leon. I've heard about him. I know his story. So I thought, I'm in Texas. I think Leon was from Texas. Maybe he's from around here. So I Googled his name, and there's an actual museum about Leon. So we traveled over there on the lunch break and went through the museum, and I was reading all these amazing things about Leon and some interesting things that I had not heard about him. So let me share a couple of thoughts about Leon with you. Leon grew up right after the Great Depression, so he was very poor. They were sharecroppers in Texas right after the Great Depression. So a lot of poverty, very difficult way to make a living as a sharecropper right after the Depression. Leon was number 7 of 12 kids. So there were a lot of mouths to feed as sharecroppers right after the Depression, right? So that there's just not a lot going around there. Leon's father did the best he could, but the day came where he just walked away from the family. It crushed the family. He was the only breadwinner. The mom was taking care of 12 kids. She did not have a job. This was right after the Great Depression. So the father leaves the family, and now there's 12 kids to feed. The mom's trying to do the best she can, and they don't have a source of income. That's some rough times, folks. So then Leon has to quit the 5th grade. He quits school to go to work to try to provide some food for the family. And he ends up going back to school later. But can you imagine? I've got to quit the 5th grade just so my siblings and I can eat. Well, that was part of his life. That's what he did. But again, part of the trauma, right? Then the great tragedy happened when he was 16 years old. His mother died. He was always close to his mom. But when his dad left, boy, he really got close to her, and he was really tight with his mom. And he said in his book, said, when my mother died, a piece of my heart left, and it was never to return. It was never to return. I mean, that's heartache, folks. His dad abandons the family. There's 12 kids. His mom dies at 16. What do you do? How do you keep going? All the older siblings are now trying to take care of the younger siblings. Well, this was the late 30s, so the World War II came along, and World War II became an out, a way to do something different. It was a way for him to do 2 things for Leon. He wanted to fight for his country. He was proud of his country. He had uncles who had been in World War I, so he'd heard those stories, and he thought, this is a way for me to serve, but it's also a way for me to make some money. So when he was in the service, almost all of his money he sent back home to his siblings so they could eat, so they could have something. So during World War II, he goes down to the Marines. And he says to the Marines, I'm here. I'm ready to sign up. And the Marines looked at this underage, underweight, short, teenage kid, and they said, kid, you're too small, you're too young, you're too underweight, we don't want you. Go sign up for the Army. See, Leon was 17, he was only 5'5", and he was only 110 pounds. And they said, no, we don't want you, go sign up for the Army. So Leon leaves and goes to the Navy, right? He goes to the Navy, he says, I'm ready to fight for my country. They said, kid, you're too young, you're too short, you're too underweight, we don't want you. Go to the Army. So Leon goes to the Army, and the Army says, we'll take you, but you need to work in special services, which is the laundry or the kitchen, because they said, you're too young, you're too short, you're too underweight. You're not good for combat. Those guys have to march long marches and carry heavy packs. So go work in the kitchen. He said, I don't want to cook for my country. I don't want to clean for my country. I want to fight for my country. They said, are you sure? Because that's a lot of work and you're a small guy. And he said, I want to be in the infantry. So they left him in the infantry. He goes about doing what he does. See, what Marines didn't know, what the Navy didn't know, what the Army didn't know was Leon was full of potential. He was full of bravery. He was full of audacity. He was full of tenacity. He was full of courage. But when he stood in front of that recruiter's table, all they saw was a skinny, scrawny teenage kid who was too young and too short and too underweight. I don't blame them. They weren't wrong for not noticing his bravery while he stood at the table. There was no way to develop that and to show that at that moment, right? So they weren't wrong for not noticing that, but he had it in him the whole time. They just didn't see it. So in Leon, he had that potential. He had that potential to be a warrior. They just didn't know about it. Leon goes on and he does a couple of things. Leon goes on to become Audie Leon Murphy, America's most decorated soldier of all time. So when I was in that hamburger shop, I saw this photo there on the left side of your screen. And I said, I know this guy. I've seen his movies. I've seen some things about him. So I hunted him down and I found out these other things about his life. That he was rejected by the Marines. He was rejected by the Navy. The Army told him to become a cook. But he said, no, I've got something else inside me. And I want to fight for my country. And in doing so, they let him fight. And he became the most decorated soldier of all time. So what else happened? What they also didn't know about Leon was after the war, he would go on to star in over 40 movies in Hollywood. He would go on to write poetry and country western songs. They didn't see that in him either. In fact, interesting, Shepherd David would go on to become king and also quite a warrior. And he would also write and sing a lot of songs in the Psalms. So they had an interesting parallel, though. Things that they did not see, but were always in them the whole time. So let me read you a letter from a foster mom. We got this letter from one of our camps. It was so amazing. As a trainer, I just knew that this letter is packed with information. Dear church staff, I don't know where to start other than to say thank you. These two words seem so simple, but I have no idea, and you have no idea how much weight I'm putting on them. Last Sunday, I dropped off my son. This comes after months and years of struggle. We had never been away from each other for 5 days and 4 nights since he'd come to live with us. Listen to this. The trauma, PTSD, mood disorders, ADHD, and extreme behaviors have been something we have been trying to get through for 6 years. I'm going to read that line again. The trauma, PTSD, mood disorders, ADHD, and extreme behaviors are something we've been trying to get through for 6 years. This foster mom is a hero. This foster mom is amazing. She's been working with this young man through all of this stuff. Oh, it's a lot of stuff to work with. She said most recently, he was asked to not return to school to finish the school year after a total of 32 days being suspended. That's 6 weeks. He had been suspended 32 days for one reason or another. More recently, he jumped out of the second-story window 2 days before camp to try to run away, right? There's some challenge here, right? There's some challenge here. She says, I will admit, I was taking selfies out of pure joy at the church after I dropped him off. The thought of 5 days and 4 nights sounded like an all-inclusive vacation for me. She's been dealing with ADHD and extreme behaviors and trauma and PTSD. No wonder. Remember, when we minister to the kids, we're also ministering back to the foster families who just need a respite, who just need a break. So she was elated. But listen, she says, that being said, I also wanted him to have a great time. I wanted him to have his paradise week too. Well, we made it through the 5 days without a phone call. She says, I was nervous picking him up. Was he going to be the same kid I dropped off? Was he going to be mad about something, upset, or broken down? She said, I came to sign him out, and I heard from somebody that said this about the boy. He had a great time. He smiled and had fun. She said, I was told he was not without his challenges, but he made it through the week just fine. She said, well, I thought this guy's lying pretty well because I know what people mean when they say he was not without his challenges. She said, then went to the nurse, the nurse, she said, gave me the look. You know, the look of pity I get right before a principal tells me that he's being suspended again. But then the nurse said, oh my goodness, he was just the sweetest boy. I just love him so much. He gave me hugs every day and helped the other campers. He has to come back next year. So the foster mom says, well, as a natural skeptic, I thought, yeah, right. She's got my kid mixed up with somebody else. Then the kids start coming through the door, and he found her and he gave her a big hug and immediately pulled out some crosses that he had made at the activity center for his brother and sister. He took out his photo album. It was full of wonderful, happy photos. He was so excited. He was filthy, but happy. Listen to that. He was filthy, but happy. I think that should be our next tagline. Filthiness is next to godliness at a Royal Family Kids Camp program, right? Or camp or mentoring program. We could put that on the foster parent brochure. Send your kid to mentoring club and he'll be filthy, but happy. Well, I know we're not going to use that as a tagline, but that tells us something that's going on. It's better to be happy than clean, right? Filthy, but happy. I love it. She says, I will admit, listen to this. I will admit, I was the one crying that day at the church out of pure joy. My heart was ready to burst with how happy he was. That's a mom that's been through a lot. Remember the trauma, the PTSD. She says, I was about ready to burst with how happy he was. He was loved. He wasn't judged. He was able to have his 5 days and nights of all-inclusive paradise. He was able to be a kid without the stresses of everyday life as a kid in the system. And then she says, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Lord, ladies and gentlemen, we've been talking about potential. The potential in David was not yet seen. The potential in Leon was not yet seen. The potential of this boy was seen. The potential was that he would run away. The potential was that he would have some great challenges. The potential was that he would have all kinds of trauma going on. So sometimes we don't know about the potential. Sometimes we do. How do we manage unseen potential? How do we manage known potential? This camp is one just like yours. Every one of your chapters have had kids like this who on their application On the application, there's a lot of challenge. There's a lot going on. And yet we want to be able to take these kids and say, what else is in there? What else is the potential of what this child has? So how do we create a potential mindset of the things we don't know or the things that we do know? Let's talk about that for just a moment. Again, there's a handout for this session as well as all the others, so look at the handouts as well. We want to train our eyes to look beyond the outward appearance. That's that verse in 1 Samuel, that God looks at the heart, but man looks at the outward appearance. So we want to train our eyes to always look beyond the outward appearance. It's easy to say, it's easy to put on a slide, but we have to actively work at training our eyes to look beyond that outward appearance. Second thing, we want to train our brain to understand their past, but not let it taint their potential. That's what this letter's talking about. This boy has a past. He didn't cause that on his own. He went through some sort of trauma and abuse and abandonment and neglect, and it's caused some changes to him and in some of his behaviors. We don't fault him for that, but we have to understand it. We don't want to act in ignorance. If a child is sexually acting out, we need to know. If a child is threatening others, we need to know those things. So we have to understand their past, but we don't want their past to taint their potential. This boy was not treated as if he was going to be a runaway. He was not treated as if he was a kid that's going to get kicked out. He was treated like royalty. And he felt like royalty, and then he acted that way. He acted differently based partly on prayers ahead of time, but also on the way he was treated. So we want to train our brain to understand the past, but not let it taint the potential. And then last, we want to train our heart. We want to train our heart to believe in the amazing potential of every single child. That's that piece of faith. That's that scripture in Hebrews, to believe in what we don't yet see. Every child that steps off that bus, every child that shows up to Mentoring Club, we need to train our heart to believe that there's amazing things in there. Now, I am not suggesting that if we just do these things, our campers and our mentor kids are going to become as famous and well-known as David, King David, and Audie Murphy. I'm not suggesting that is going to happen or that it even should happen. What I'm suggesting, and I'm using these stories to help all of us understand, that it is common for more to be in there than what we fully see, for more to be in there for what we fully understand. These kids are just still kids. Many of you did not develop into what you developed into until later years in life. These kids are in that same boat. And with abandonment and abuse, some of that is even more subdued, where they're not ready to show and express yet. So we want to show up and train our heart to believe through faith that there's amazing things in there, that God has uniquely designed them to be amazing people in the future. So what do you see when you think about this word potential? And you see some of these kids show up at your mentoring club or at your campsite. What do you see? Do you see their past? Do you see the challenges? Do you see their future? Do you see what they can become? We have no idea. Those people who spent time with Shepherd David, they had no idea that he was going to become a king and a warrior and a psalmist. People who spent time with Audie Murphy when he was 12, they didn't know he was going to win all those battles, win all those medals. They didn't know he was going to become a songwriter and a poet. We've spent time with kids, and we sometimes we see some glimpses, and it's powerful. If you see any kind of glimpses of potential, it's great to reinforce those glimpses. If they show any kind of talent or skill or ability or compassion, it's great to reinforce those principles and those things you see. But let's understand, a lot of things we don't yet see, but we can still believe. So I put a photo of the bus right here in the middle. What would it be like if next time the bus pulls up, somebody says, "Hey, on this bus is full of potential. This bus is full of potential for the future." Or when the kids come to Mentoring Club to say, these kids coming into the gym right now are full of potential. We just wonder and stand in awe about what that potential might be. So let's bring a potential mindset to your next RFK program. And let's look at those things and see, how can we train our eyes and train our brain and train our heart to have the best potential possible? All right.